So
Hi,
great to be
welcome.
here. Thank
Welcome.
you.
I want to just dive in really quickly. So I've interviewed Reshma before and a few times. And so I want to start with a quote that you said, and then you can kind of expand on it. So you said, I was the daughter of immigrants. I was wanting to make my parents happy. So I did everything right. I got all the right grades I was supposed to get. I went to the right schools, worked at the right places. And I thought that if I was perfect, I'd be happy. If I put all those notches on my belt, that would bring me joy. What I was so confused about is when I had it all together, why was I still so miserable? And by the way, everybody, if this is resonating with you, put it in the chat. So what do you mean by this?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think growing up as the daughter of immigrants who came here and who like got the American dream, it was always about, go become a lawyer. You know what I mean? Go to an Ivy League school, right? Go work at that place. I remember when I first got my paycheck working in a law firm, my father framed it because they had never seen so much money before. But I also got in my head, right, that if I did all these things, that I would feel satisfied. I would feel happy. I would feel joyful. And, it's funny. I feel like for me in that moment in my life, I felt more passion when things didn't work out than when things actually did work out. And so that was just like a big eye opener that like, I'm doing all the things that I'm supposed to do, but I'm still not happy. And I still don't feel like I'm living my life of purpose. And that's what really inspired me to quit and to run for Congress, something that like I had like less than a 1% chance of winning.
Mm-hmm. Was that something that you'd always wanted to do? And then tell me the decision to actually run.
Yeah. I mean, I think my dad, it was Dr. King's birthday yesterday, and we started the day in my house by watching Dr. King's speech. And it was very much how I was raised. Like my father would read me these Reader's Digest books about like Dr. King and Mahatma Gandhi and Eleanor Roosevelt. And so from the time I was little, like I was moved by being a change maker. And I also had a very romantic view about politicians, ironically, considering what happened last week, that like, if you got a chance to serve the country, you really could make a difference. And so, yes, pretty much from the time I was little, like that's what I wanted to do. I just didn't know how. Nobody where I came from ran for office. I didn't know about running how do you start a campaign? How do you do that? Like it seemed so daunting. And so I think I found myself just putting it off, putting it off, putting it off. I was also $300,000 in student loan debt. And so I felt like I had to go work for the man, make a dent in those loans. And then I would be like free to go do what I was really meant to do. And by the time that happened, I was in my mid-30s and I was stuck in a life that I didn't want. I was stuck in a career that I didn't want, and I didn't know how to get out.
How do you get out? And by the way, I really appreciate you mentioning how many you know your loans. I think it's a mistake to tell people follow your passion, or it's like, well, hold on now. Does your passion make you money? And you have to be realistic about this. So, knowing that you started down a path that you realized you didn't want to go, I mean, would you have done things differently? I mean, how would you have paid off your loans if you hadn't started that way?
Well, I tell young people this all the time. So like, I think there is something about being a woman in credentializing. Like, meaning there was something for me about being this girl from Schaumburg in the Midwest and having a Harvard or Yale degree next to her that I thought that people would only take me seriously if I had that. What's interesting now is it doesn't matter. I don't know about you, but I can't remember the last time I've looked at where somebody went to school. I want to know, are you a hard worker? Are you going to hustle? Are you going to do things that are out of your your job spec and not complain about it? Like there's different things. But back then it really felt like I needed that to get here. And so that was really, something that I that was really important to me, or at least I thought was important to me. I mean, to your point about like, how did I do that? Like, I'm someone, I don't know about you, Claire, but for me, I need to be rock bottom to get clarity. Like I need to, and at that moment in my life, I was depressed. Felt really stuck. And I don't think I ever, now, I mean, I think at that moment in my life, I hadn't really felt so lost and so sad and so fearful, like, is this my life? And so I'm someone who like, those are the moments that jolt me into like making a change. And I think that's what really inspired me. And like a best friend who happened to call at that moment was like, just quit.
Uh-huh.
I was like, oh yeah, I can quit. I can take agency over my own life.
So it's interesting. So you kind of started in, I would say maybe a bit of a safe way, but then you did the exact opposite and did something that's incredibly risky that you said less than a 1% chance of, of winning. And there's statistics out there that say, women are way less likely to apply for a job if they don't have 100% of the requirements, right? And that's for a myriad of reasons. Now you are going out and you go, I have a 1% chance of winning. I'm still going to do it. Talk to me about, I think, the campaign and I know we've discussed this before, but specifically raising money, since obviously here around negotiating and talking about money. So how'd you do that?
Yeah. So I don't know if I thought I had a 1% chance. It wasn't until later that I was like, oh, because it's funny. If you talk to any politician, they'll tell you they swear they're going to win. Like you can't do this unless you actually believe that you're going to win. My first campaign was one of the best moments of my life. I now know this well. Like I actually love being afraid. Like I love trying new things that kind of scare me. It makes me feel alive. And so like every moment of that campaign was frightening. Mm-hmm. Like I had never given a stump speech before. I had never spoken at a senior center before. I had never gone on TV. And of course, my first television interview was like Chris Matthews. Like,
oh my goodness.
So mean, right? Like, but I had never done any of the things that I was about to do. And I was terrified every single day, but then so alive because I was so terrified. Mm-hmm. And I also realized like, ooh, this is how you should live. Like all that I had been doing for the past 15 years in those safe jobs, in those safe opportunities, just getting through the day, right? Not really feeling anything. That's not life. And so that was a real kind of aha moment for me, in that first campaign. Like I always say now, it's like, it's better to live a life of regrets than to like live a life of woulda, shoulda, coulda.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. This is quite morbid, but I work backwards from like, if I were to be hit by a bus tomorrow, do I stand by the choices I've made? And I mean, you mentioned regret. I've read that this is something a lot of entrepreneurs, we think about death. Is that a mentality that you have worked backwards from?
That what? That I
just always,
that like on my dying day, what I want?
Yeah. And thinking even about legacy and,
Well, one, I realized I'm never satisfied. So if I died today, I'd be really pissed off because I haven't done everything that I've wanted to do. But I do feel like, and this is, I'm a Hindu, this is part of like, we say like, what's your dharma? Like what you put on this earth to do. I have a lot of clarity about my purpose in this life, in this moment. And so for me, every decision I make now is like, am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing to serve the most amount of people?
But how do you know what that is? I mean, I just get that question all the time of how do I find my purpose? Because it seems so daunting. I have some ideas of my own that I can share, but for you, even just realizing, okay, Girls Who Code, this is what I want to go all in on. How'd you get there?
I don't think I was there in the beginning. I mean, listen, I think that I had I've been doing the same thing since I was 10 years old, marching, protesting, organizing about the same things: poverty, women, girls, opportunity. That is 100% because my parents coming here as refugees gave me a profound sense of patriotism to this country. I know it sounds cheesy, but like I've always wanted to give back to the country that literally saved my parents' life. And that just so the way I did it has come in many different forms. So, when Girls Who Code, when I started Girls Who Code, I didn't really think I was going to run it. I was actually looking for someone else to do that. I had an idea that I wanted to put out there in the world that I think should happen. But for me, it was like, I was an activist and movement leader, and to start a nonprofit, what? No, like nonprofits are too slow, right? You can't really make a difference. Like all of that was like what I had in my head. And so when I decided that I wanted, if I lost another race that I ran for and lost, and I said, okay, like, you know what? I am going to go build Girls Who Code into something and I'm gonna put all of my desires for change into that organization. And so I built it like I would run a movement. And and I think that was the difference, is I made it into something. I've been thinking about this a lot um, in my work, and I often tell women, look, like, if I had applied for the Girls Who Code CEO, I never would have gotten that job. They never would have given it to me. I wouldn't have been qualified. I wouldn't have had the right experience. And the reality is that most jobs out there for women, they're not going to give it to you. And so what I've realized, that it's so important to create your own reality. Like if you if you've even the slightest bit of entrepreneurship in you, go build something, create something, design something, make something, right? Like that is when you get to realize your fullest sense of purpose. Now, some people are lucky that they get to work in organizations and they have mentors and leaders who see them and see their potential, and they can go all the way up. But I think it's harder.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, in thinking about like, quote, finding your purpose, I think you just take an action, you do the thing, and then you do it enough times, following what you're curious about or feel moved by. And then as you look back, you see, oh, there are patterns here. Oh, maybe I'm uncovering my purpose, rather than having this kind of abstract idea and marching towards it. I know that,
Right.
yeah, go ahead.
Or I was going to add one thing too, because I think it's important. I always thought that my purpose was a title. And I see this oftentimes with the young people that work for me. It's like they want, I want to be a manager. I want to manage 3 people, right? Or I want to be a teacher. I want to, like, it's the title, right? Not the experience. And so for me, it's like getting really attuned. Like, I think especially in this moment, we know what makes us outraged. We know what makes us cry. We know what makes us laugh. Like you should know what moves you.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can find a job where you can get paid, you know what I mean, to push that purpose, that's great. So like life to me is a journey really about having as many experiences so you can get closer to that. I think that we think, especially as women, that we have to chase titles,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's where we get lost.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I want to talk a little bit about you saying that you wouldn't have been hired, because I think people listening might be surprised by that. I know you didn't have coding as your background, which really, I mean, talk about imposter syndrome for a second. I mean, did you
Yeah.
ever have times of doubt, that you were qualified for it? I mean, how did
No, no.
disconnect?
Isn't that crazy? You know
Yeah.
why I did it? Because, my congressional loss was so public,
Okay.
so spectacular, so humiliating, right? That, and I wish that for everybody. I wish for everybody to fail so spectacular as early as you can, because you realize, like, oh, that wasn't as bad as I had imagined it in my head. And it almost builds like a sense of like superpower idealism. Like I can do anything. So like for Girls Who Code, it's interesting. Like it really didn't occur to me that I wasn't a coder. I had never run a nonprofit before. I'd never managed at that time, more than a handful of people before that. I'd never raised, more than at that time $1 million or so. So I had less skills to do that job than I didn't have skills. You know what I mean? Like, and so that's what I mean by like, if I was applying for the CEO of Girls Who Go at that moment, I would have been a failed congressional candidate. You know what I mean? That worked in finance as a corporate lawyer. That like, would you hire me? No. Like, so I think but I was passionate. And so I wasn't worried about what people were saying about me. I wasn't worried about the imposter syndrome. I was fixed on my goal to teach 1 million girls to code.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Do you have any stories from the early days of, trying to figure things out, and maybe talk a little bit about resilience, which I know you haven't, you demonstrated that through getting back on the horse from failing your candidacy and moving on, but from early days, any stories?
Well, they always say like most CEOs are either visionaries or they're executors, but they're not both. That was certainly true when I started. I had a lot of ideas, But I was like, what are KPIs? What do you mean I got to put an HR policy? Like and I was so lucky to have a board who really believed in me and saw how important my vision was, that they could issue spot before I saw it, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're like, you got to hire a COO, or we got to put this policy in place for you. And many times, and also for me, so having a board that believed in you was really important. Secondly, I was really comfortable hiring people who were smarter than me.
Mm-hmm.
So I had people around me who guided me,
Mm-hmm.
you know what I mean, who pushed back on me in terms of what I wanted to do, or who saw me and like, elevated what was great about my leadership. But I didn't have arrogance or hubris about that. And I think that that's really, really, really important. I had a coach, raw goddess, from the beginning, and someone who I could talk to and like guide me. I had women who were similarly trying to build things, and so I feel like I had a support system around me. But like I was also, I had a lot of self-awareness. I knew what I didn't know. I knew what I was bad at. Like I knew, you know what I mean? And I think people allowed me to evolve and grow into the CEO that I've become.
A lot of women in my community equate what they do and the outcome of what they do, right? So if this is a success, and usually it's the perception of success, right? Whether their boss told them they did a good job or not, they equate that with their identity and their self-worth. And so of course, when things don't go the way they wanted them to, or usually they actually do a good job, but then maybe they're, they perceive their boss to have not liked what they did. How do you not let it destroy you?
Yeah. Well, I'm very bad at that. Like, I mean, I grew up with these very kind of South Asian Indian parents. When I lost my first job, my dad sent me an email of the 10 things I did wrong.
Oh my God.
I'm in the front page of the New York Times. Even though he's seen it, he will not send me an email being like, oh my God, I'm so proud of you. Like, I know he's got this secret closet of all my awards and articles, but he very much, my parents, my father in particular, parenting strategy was very much like tough love. I'm going to raise you to be humble. I'm not going to tell you how great you are. I'm not going to give you affirmation all the time. I'm not going to pat you on the back and be like, good job. Right. I'm going to actually give you feedback and criticism, and I'm going to teach you how to get better. And so that was for me. So I don't need it. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't need the affirmation, sometimes to a fault.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Because that means that I don't celebrate the wins. So when like amazing things happen, a lot of, like, I'm sure your friends are like, oh, let's go out to dinner or celebrate, or you'll say, I'm just kind of like, but that's not good, because then what sticks with you is the things that didn't work out, not the things that actually happened for you. So it's a practice that I'm trying to really shift and change. But it's also, what made it hard for me in the beginning to be a great CEO, because I didn't do that pat on your back stuff. I did it. And it wasn't until later, like, I realized, well, people need that. They need to be told good job. They need to be told that they've done it. They need public affirmation. And so just because I don't need it doesn't mean that it's not valid.
Right. I was going to ask you about how to best manage people, especially since you didn't, you said you didn't have the experience of more than a handful of folks. So what you learned as both the CEO, but in managing people?
Well, I think I've learned to like always tell people the truth. Mm-hmm. I think, and this is one of the things I've realized, especially with women, because I mostly, my team is, 90 women. Now we have, 60 women, but it's a lot of women. Mm-hmm. And, a lot of us have not gotten that feedback. So when you get it in work, it feels personal.
Right.
And so then I think what we do as managers is we're like, I'm just not going to tell them that. I don't want to hurt their feelings. And we hold back the truth, which I think allows people to actually, like honest candor, right? Radical Candor.
Radical
right?
Candor. Yep.
Love that book, right?
So who doesn't know it, I'm just going to put the name in there.
Yeah.
It's a great management book.
And I think that that's something that I think is very, very, very important. I think, again, I live and die by KPIs, right? And my company goals and metrics and data, and how are we getting to them, and like, how did we do, and how are we tracking progress? We celebrate failure. We don't not try new things, and there's no consequences, quote, you know what I mean, for failing. I think that one of the things though that still is this is, we are an organization, and I think I will always run organizations that are always changing and evolving, and that your job might be X one day and it might be Y another day. Now that doesn't work for everybody, right? Like people like consistency, and it's hard to be kind of movement building and it be consistent because the world is, as we know, constantly changing. So how are you attracting those folks to your organization? Or when you realize that someone's in your organization that's not going to work for them, being able to really be honest about that. My friend Jack Dorsey always told me that the most important lesson for a CEO is to be able to fail fast. I mean, to fire fast.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's so tough. Let's talk about perfectionism.
Yeah.
I went across the country a few years ago and I hosted town halls for women to talk about money, which it was really not about money. It was about freedom and power and value. I went to 19 cities. I saw upwards of 3,000 women. Perfectionism was the universal. And imposter syndrome, but I would say perfectionism, which this is the universal because you wrote a book about it.
Yeah.
You did a TED Talk about it. So let's talk about first, how did this become the issue that you wanted to focus on? And then please give us tips. And by us, me, please give me tips.
Especially right now. I mean, man, look, I think for me, I like I said, I've been very clear about my women and girls kind of mission. And, when I got an opportunity to do a TED Talk, and I really looked at the leadership numbers and saw that we haven't changed, nor are we happier as women. I kind of looked at my students and I said, well, what am I seeing in your behavior that might actually attribute something to this? And, I tell the story in my TED Talk about how when girls first come to our program and they're first learning how to code, they delete their code instead of calling their teacher over and say, hey, I wrote this. I think the semicolon's in the wrong place. What should I do? They rather show nothing at all. So they rather delete, their line of code than get critical feedback or get feedback at all. And so this idea of like, we've learned somewhere along the line to give up before we even try. I give this talk and I am inundated, hundreds of thousands of notes and emails and DMs from women all across the country, whether they're Black, they're white, they're trans, they're gay, they're poor, they're rich, they're 60 or they're 16. Somewhere along the line, we're all deleting the code of our lives, right? And what I mean by that is we're giving up before we even try. And it's causing a profound amount of unhappiness, but it's also leading to why we haven't closed the leadership gap. And so I wrote a book about this, and it stems from perfectionism. So I think the way that it starts is like when we're raised, and you could probably think about a memory where this has happened to you, we are often coddled and protected. So you go to a playground with our boys, we're like kicking them in the stomach, having them climb up the ladder, fall flat, but for our daughters, we're like, be careful, honey. Don't swing too high. Is your dress dirty? Come over here. Let me clean you up. So it starts because we want to protect them physically. So we wrap them up with bubble wrap. And then it extends to emotional protection. So many parents say to me, my daughter went to gymnastics. She can barely do a cartwheel. She comes home every day crying. What should I do? And I think our instinct is to pull her out and put her into soccer or dance or something that she's good at so she can feel validated, right? And so you don't get exposure by the time you're 13, 14 years old to rejection, to feedback, to failure, right? And so you start getting addicted to the things that you're good at. You start thinking that the things that you're good at are actually the things that you like, because everything in your life is pointing you towards being perfect, towards being good, because that's when you are praised, right? That's when you feel safe. And so you see the ramifications of perfectionism on like every aspect. So you see it in school, where women will drop out of an economics major if they get a B in an introductory level course, whereas men are like, I got a D, I'm running for president, right? Like, you see it in mental health, where women are suffering from anxiety, depression at twice the rate of men. And again, you see it in leadership. You raise that number about how men will apply for a job if they meet 60% of the qualifications. For women, it's 100. Like, we don't even apply until we can check off every single box. And so the antidote to that is bravery. we're going to talk, I hope, a little bit about this idea of this Marshall Plan that I've been
Yeah.
talking about for
Yeah.
moms.
Yep.
And when we get to that, I want to talk about how I think perfectionism is bleeding into this, in a big way.
Okay. Let's talk about that. That was written down because I've been seeing you just really being vocal. I am so glad you're being vocal about what this pandemic is doing.
Yeah.
To moms. Which, by the way, for everybody here, if you want to learn more about the wage gap or sort of understand what contributes to it, it's Motherhood Penalty. It's
Yeah.
actually moms seeing a 4% decrease for every child they have. And
Yeah.
on the reverse, fathers get a 4 to 6% increase. So to put the pandemic aside for a second,
Yeah.
the inequities that exist, a lot of it has to do actually with moms.
Absolutely.
So tell me about what you're doing now. Tell me about the Marshall Plan. Are
Yeah.
you running for office?
Yeah.
And how can we, support you?
Yeah. So, I have 2 kids. One, a 5-year-old, started kindergarten. And, this year's been rough.
Yeah.
Global pandemic, running a nonprofit. I had a new baby in January, and now I got a 5-year-old in kindergarten. And, find out March, April, well, school's remote. So guess what, Reshma? You got to log them on at 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, and 12 o'clock. And you got to do laundry, and you got to cook and clean and do everything and be a CEO of the largest women and girls organization in the world and take care of a newborn, right? And every night I would just end depleted, exhausted, and just burnt out. And then I would open up my Zoom screen, and every mother I saw looked exactly how I felt.
Uh-huh.
And it didn't feel like anyone was talking about this or anyone was doing anything about it. So I really got active around school reopenings, right? Because most parents and mothers I know, they weren't waiting for a vaccine to come out. They were waiting for the schools to open. When the schools opened, their life would be better. And so what we've seen in this global pandemic is that over 2 million women have left the workforce, 4 times the amount of men. Men have actually gained jobs. Women's labor market participation is at the rate that it was in the 1980s.
Yeah.
Before COVID, we were the majority of the labor force. So we have fallen that far behind in less than a year, right? And so why has that happened? So first, it's happened because of childcare. Again, you know what I mean? School openings. I think about myself, right? It's like, I'm not raising my hand for promotions. I'm not launching the next Girls Who Code, and either are the women in my life, right? We are barely hanging on because we don't have childcare or adequate childcare in this moment. And we're asked to have all of these responsibilities in terms of remote schooling, and so many ways we've had to essentially, supplement our paid labor for unpaid labor. Right. So we've taken less hours, we've gone on food stamps, we moved in with our parents, we've quit our jobs to do the laundry, to do school, to clean the house, all of these things that society doesn't value. And the second reason why you've seen this huge drop of women is in the types of industries that have been transformed by COVID. Healthcare, retail, education, those were industries that were full of women, low-wage jobs, and women of color, right? And so I'm proposing with the Biden administration to have a Marshall Plan for mothers. So specifically name what we want to change, right? And that means for me, basic income for moms, put cash in mothers' hands so they can decide how they are going to actually reconcile their labor with what's happening at home. Secondly, pass affordable daycare, childcare, close the pay gap, right? Pass paid leave. The third thing is reopen schools 5 days a week now, and finally, it's really about thinking about retraining. I talk to so many companies, and I don't know what your thoughts are on this too, but there doesn't seem to be a plan. It's like they're sitting there watching all these women walk out the door, and there's no plan on how to get them back. Right. And so I want accountability. You cannot change what you cannot measure. I want accountability. I don't want us to get back to where we were, January 1st, 2020 in a decade. Right. I want it to happen in the next 6 months. And I think if we have a Marshall Plan for moms, I think we have a clear 360 plan on how we support mothers getting back into the workforce. We can do it.
Yeah, I mean, all of these issues existed beforehand. They just got worse. They got compounded. But the good news is they also became more talked about.
Yeah.
And so what can we actually do? I mean, in the book, I talk about how as individuals we can impact policies at our companies, but of course, from a macro sense, I mean, really it's the laws that will affect the
I
change.
think it's, I think it's three places, right? Home, work, Congress, laws, right? So I think that like in, Joe Biden's Build Back Better plan, I think that we need to have all those things. Affordable daycare. I think we need to have paid leave passed. I think we need to have childcare, tax credits. I think we need basic income for moms. Like, I think that there are things that government can actually do. And again, it not be a stopgap for this year,
Right.
but it extend into perpetuity, right? These things are fundamentally broken that need to get fixed. And I think what you're talking about, what can you do at work? So it's so interesting, right? Like, remote work seems to be here to stay. Flexibility should be here to stay. But what's the plan from going from making motherhood a penalty and fatherhood a premium? What's the plan to making motherhood a premium? It's almost like I think about the fact that like all of our partners have seen us do this work at home, but nothing's changed. So even though you like take, the cover off the lid and show the world, like I'm often sitting here, hair in a bun, baby in my lap, asking Goldman Sachs for $1 million, right? It's like, you see, this is my life.
Right.
Now, what are you going to do about it? Right? How are you going to support me? And I don't know, but, the danger to that is that now there's going to be even more of a motherhood penalty because we saw too much, right? And we can't reconcile, well, how are you going to 100% perform your job at the same time manage all of that stuff that's happening there, right? And secondly, I just don't think that a lot of the behavior in the home has changed. I don't think men have stepped up. And if it was not the case, you wouldn't see men making gains in the labor force. You wouldn't see 4 times as many women leaving the labor force to teach their children schooling. So I don't know. There's a lot we have to do across all forces. So I think it's amazing what you're talking about, with this book, because I do think that Wall Street, Main Street have a huge role to play.
And what's so wild is the statistics show that this helps everybody. I mean, I often have been saying, but the data, is there, even just having diversity in leadership, there's a 15% bump in what the company makes, right? Improvement on the bottom line. It's expensive for them to lose talent, right? So, I mean, you add to the global GDP, you're going to take kids out of poverty. I mean, this again is much larger conversation, and I know you have a life and respect your time, but it is so interesting to see how you can make the case for how it's a benefit to them, yet it is not happening. I always say, blame me, blame ladies get paid, say I'm concerned about these things, but here's a solution, right? So it's not a criticism, it's giving context why you're proposing a better paid family leave policy, and then saying here's how it's a benefit to you, and here are steps we can take next week, and that there's small steps, and collectively it'll make big change. So that we don't end on a depressing note here. What can we do to support you? Are you running for office? And just next steps with your own life and Girls Who Code, and let's so because I'm sure people are listening and ready to go jump in. So what can they do?
So look, I mean, COVID-19 was a clarifying moment in my life.
Okay.
Had it not happened, I don't know. So I'm sitting with it. I always say to everyone, I feel like now that maybe we're seeing the vaccine and seeing hopefully schools reopening, like I'm trying to think about, again, for me, the question I always ask myself is like, what's my purpose? How can I best serve? Hi, sweetie.
You can cuddle with me.
I'm cuddling with you right now. You can sit on my lap because we're almost done. What's my best purpose? Like, how can I best, don't touch, how can I best serve people? But I think that like, I do believe that we are on, do not press mute. I do believe that we are on, we're in a different place right now. We are awake, on these issues that we just talked about in mothers. I think we're angry and we're ready to act,
And that's the exciting part. And that's, that's the silver lining. I love how we're ending here. Totally makes the point. anytime we have Ladies Get Paid events and somebody walks in with a baby and speaks up, it's like, this is what we're talking about, and this is why we need to make change. Reshma, thank you so much for being here. Your time is valuable, and for folks who are on here, stay on here because I'm going to do a little bit of a reading. The recording will be up later today. I will send it to you. We can share it, and also Instagram. How can people follow you and stay updated? I know you have a great Twitter. Oh, there's the mute.
Yes, my son muted me, so I couldn't say. So at Reshma Saujani and bravenotperfect.com. And
Great.
thank you, Claire, for everything you're doing. You are such a powerhouse, and I feel so honored that you asked me to be a part of this community. So thank you.
Tell me when to mute.
Okay.
Now you mute.
On that note, bye everybody.
Bye, Reshma. Thank you. Bye. So everybody, I know that you all maybe have some other stuff to do, but for those who can stay, I would really be honored to just share my introduction of my book and answer any questions you have, career questions, questions about the book, about Ladies Get Paid, and what we can all do after this call to make some of that change. So I'll begin now. Well, actually, the introduction is called How It All Began. Before Ladies Get Paid, the book, came Ladies Get Paid, the organization. It was born from 3 pivotal moments in my life. The first happened at an advertising festival. Party after party, CEOs of major brands socialized and drank with those who wanted their business. It was mostly men. At the time, I worked for a professional platform that connected creatives with jobs, and I was there to find clients. The festival opened with an outdoor cocktail party. Whose wife are you? He was tall, probably around 60 years old, dressed in an expensive-looking white linen suit. It had been barely 5 minutes since I walked into the party. I gritted my teeth and stretched my lips into what I hoped was a smile. I'm here on business. This was going to be a long week. Around-the-clock networking is tiring. And it was. But what was even more exhausting was the invisible, though sometimes obvious, imbalance of power between genders. Men greatly outnumbered women, and their seniority dwarfed ours. I needed these men to send me their business, but so many saw me, and many of the other women there, not as valuable professional connections, but as people to party with. Repeatedly, I had to wrestle the conversation back to a place that was relevant to my work, or simply back to a place where I felt comfortable. It was draining, but I had done this dance before. In fact, I'd been doing it my entire career. Something profound happened toward the end of the festival. Needing to pee and needing a break, I sought refuge in the women's restroom. It turned out I wasn't the only one. Crowded in there were women of all ages, huddled together, connecting and commiserating. They traded business cards and tips on who to avoid and who was actually serious about networking. These women had come to the festival to get shit done. It just happened to be getting done in the ladies' room. I spent some time there recharging, then took a deep breath and went out into the fray. After the week was over, I slept for 2 days straight. I felt demoralized and a bit disgusted as I replayed each unsettling interaction over and over again, from Mr. Whose wife are you? To the guy who slurred, "You're hot," when I pitched him a business idea. Then my disgust turned inward. What had I done to attract this kind of attention? Was my dress too short? Had I been too friendly? This was an all too familiar loop, a constant refrain throughout my whole career, and maybe even my whole life. But for the first time, something short-circuited my self-doubt. For years, I'd struggled to be taken seriously as a successful, ambitious woman, questioning myself in the process. One memory stood out in particular. I was at dinner with a man a colleague had introduced me to, thinking we might partner on a project. Toward the end of the evening, he grabbed my hand and pulled me in to kiss him. I snatched my arm back. "Excuse me?" I said in disbelief. The man looked utterly confused. "But you gave me your business card," he sputtered. Besides the fact that it was a troubling misinterpretation of signals, what stayed with me was the fact that I was being perceived as a potential sexual partner instead of a professional one, despite every indication that I was there to do business. And as a result, networking with this person, who otherwise would have been valuable for my work, was an opportunity I would not pursue. It also made me feel like shit. I had a realization. How many other times had I missed opportunities, not because of a lack of ability or performance, but because I was a woman? How many hours had I wasted agonizing about how to maneuver among men like these in this world that they had created? I thought of all the energy I'd wasted seeking approval from the men around me. I couldn't continue like this. Something needed to change. I opened my laptop and Googled 3 words: women, work, and inequality. What I learned shook me to my core. The majority of today's college graduates are women, yet less than 22% of us make it past middle management. The wage gap, which is usually referred to as being 78 to 80 cents to the man's dollar, is not the reality for everyone. Depending on your race and a myriad of other factors, it can be so much worse. Black women make between 63 and 68 cents on the dollar, while Hispanic women make a mere 55 cents on the dollar. I was shocked. I felt angry. And on top of that, I was ashamed for not knowing it was that bad, and that reeked of my privilege. I'd grown up being told I could do and be whatever I dreamed of, that our workplaces are a meritocracy, and that the fight for equality was over and won by my mother's generation. My mother is here. I was finally understanding this was not a reality, and I wanted to do something about it. As I continued to research women in the workplace, I discovered an entire vocabulary that put words to things I'd always felt but hadn't known how to articulate. For example, I learned about emotional labor, the contortionism that women, especially women of color, perform to fit into and accommodate environments where they are not the status quo. All of this was enlightening, but it was also overwhelming. With such systemic entrenched bias, what could I, as an individual, possibly do? A year later, I was approached by an art director friend of mine, Lita. She'd recently found out that a male art director friend of hers was charging almost double she was. This discovery made Lita realize how little she knew about pricing and how important it was for this to be a larger, more open conversation with our peers. She was also concerned that the lack of transparency might mean other people were underpricing themselves, which in turn could be bringing down wages for everyone. Because I was the director of marketing for a platform that helped people find work, I was in a position to bring information and awareness to a large network of people. Lita wondered if there was something I could do to help women learn what they should be paid. It began to dawn on me that in so many ways, money symbolized much of what I'd been agonizing over in the past year. Money and having the same opportunities to earn just as much as men was about more than a number. It represented value, worth, and above all, power. All things that as women, we have historically been denied. This conversation with Lita happened during the lead up to the 2016 presidential election. As I thought about organizing an event for women to talk about money, I became intrigued by the town halls the candidates were hosting, and I thought it could be a good alternative in lieu of the format of a typical panel. I envisioned one made up of women of different backgrounds and professions, trading stories and advice about money in an open forum, essentially democratizing a subject that had always seemed to be in the domain of experts, men. More important, it could finally get us talking about a topic that was taboo, that was considered crass, but that men seemed able to navigate with ease. Maybe if one of us spoke up, others would follow. All we needed was a bit of encouragement. To get people to sign up, I asked 6 women I admired if they would be open to sharing their money stories. I also asked each of them to recommend a few women they thought should be there. For every woman I was introduced to, I asked if they could recommend another woman who might want to attend. This went on until we reached capacity. The day of the event, 100 women came. They crowded together on couches, spilling out onto the floor, passing around bottles of wine, buzzing with energy. It actually wasn't wine, it was tequila because it was Cinco de Mayo. There was probably wine too. That's not in the introduction, I'm just telling you that. It reminded me of the ladies' room at the advertising festival. It was my first public speaking experience, and I knew I didn't have all the answers. I was there to learn just as much as they were. I told the room that we could get out of the event only as much as we were willing to give. To receive help meant we had to offer it. We raised our glasses to one another and we began. It was like a cork shooting out of a champagne bottle. One story begat another as these women opened up to one another and to themselves. They shared stories of disappointments and struggles, missed opportunities, denied promotions. There were lots of tears, but lots of high fives too. One woman stood up and declared, "I'm an illustrator and I make a shit ton of money." She got a standing ovation. I was right. This conversation was about so much more than the dollars in our pockets. It was about solidarity. It was about self-worth. It was also about taking action to right the wrongs that we'd been laboring under. We could no longer wait and hope to be rewarded. Money was the first step, a tangible thing that could mark progress on what was sure to be a long road ahead. I'm almost done, so thank you all for sticking around for this introduction. To close the wage gap, we could start with ourselves by advocating for our worth. But for all of us to rise, we needed to work together. 3 hours later, the event was technically over, but no one was leaving. I was becoming antsy since the venue was charging me by the hour. "Go home," I shouted as I turned off the lights. Everyone reluctantly shuffled out, and I could hear them discussing what bar to go to. They didn't want the conversation to end. As one of the women walked out, she pulled me aside. "This," she said, motioning around the room. "You should do this." I didn't know what she meant, but something magical had happened that night. On my way home, I felt electric. That energy in the room was coursing through my veins and my mind was racing. It had been over a year since I'd Googled workplace inequality. And I thought that maybe, just maybe, this could be the start of something big, something that could lead toward making things right. While I didn't quite know what was next, perhaps the first step was simply for us to share our stories as we had done that night. Over the course of the next 12 months, I organized 250 town halls in 19 cities, bringing together thousands of women to talk about money, power, work, and self-worth. And every time a woman got up to speak, she discovered she was not alone. As I watched them, I knew there had to be a way to harness the strength we have when we come together. I wanted to see it move beyond those rooms and those town halls, to build an even larger collective that could allow us to learn from one another, encourage one another, and share practical advice and professional guidance to get us where we wanted to be. The town halls were our catharsis, but with no action afterward, all that inspiration and energy would be wasted and nothing would change. While organizing these events, I witnessed the power in peer-to-peer sharing, but I also saw there was a great need for concrete tools to fix actual problems. One topic that kept coming up in the town halls all across the country was insecurity surrounding salary negotiation. Teaching more women how to negotiate their salaries wasn't a big picture structural change, but it could at least start moving the needle in the short term. As I fit the pieces together, I knew there was something special happening, but what I didn't know was that a movement was being born. By the way, more than 2 million messages have been exchanged in our Slack group since 2016, so they have a lot to talk about in our community. This was one area of actionable change that became the cornerstone of our movement and a springboard for accessing and improving broader issues impacting women in the workplace. As of this writing, the Ladies Get Paid community has grown to more than 100,000 women who are all working together to advance women in the workplace. Okay, we'll talk about the book now. In this book, I will share the stories of 9 members. Some names and identifying details have been changed. Each in their own way, these women battle internal and external struggles, pushing up against the bounds of what they and others expect of themselves, and are ultimately able to reach places of purpose, fulfillment, and power. For many of them, this meant undoing assumptions and rebuilding expectations, examining where they came from and becoming clear on what direction they will go to. In their stories, I will highlight what they can teach us. In those moments, I hope you will reflect on your own life and how you'll use these tools to rocket yourself forward. This book is organized into 4 parts. The first part explores the obstacles we may have in ourselves. We'll examine expectations we may have inherited from our families, the media, our communities, and other influences about what career success looks like and what we can achieve, which is very much Reshma's story, right? From there, we'll learn to identify and evaluate opportunities to make sure we are headed on a path that's aligned with our values and goals. Then we'll break down imposter syndrome and perfectionism, 2 major internal roadblocks, often resulting from systemic and cultural obstacles that stand in our way of feeling and doing our best. In the second part of the book, we'll broaden our focus. You'll learn how to build and leverage your network to get where you want to go. This includes interviewing, securing, and negotiating for a new job. But getting the job is only the first step. You need to also set yourself up for success. That means educating yourself on how to develop healthy work habits for the long game. Things like conducting an inventory of your energy and setting boundaries for yourself and others so that you don't burn out. You can't do well if you aren't well. Then we'll explore how to navigate upward, cultivating a support system, increasing our visibility, and taking advantage of opportunities. The ultimate goal? To seek out rewarding challenges and do our best work in a place that recognizes and rewards us. At a certain point, however, trying to do well in a system that was not made by or for us is not good enough. The system itself has to change. The final part of the book is about what we can do to make our workplaces more inclusive and supportive of women, including policies and practices companies can implement to make that happen. But for true systemic change to happen, we need updated and evolved laws. The appendix includes information on how to lobby your elected officials to enact laws that ensure wide-ranging and long-lasting progress. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that some of the lessons in this book come from a place of relative privilege. Being able to walk away from a negotiation or turning down a job are luxuries. And while as women we are bound together by our marginalized status, my experience in the workplace as a white cisgender woman is not the same as that of a Black woman, or a Hispanic woman, or a woman with a disability, or a trans woman, or any of the countless women in groups pushed to the fringes of society who have been fighting these battles for generations. I firmly believe that we have progressed only as far as those who still struggle the most among us. If we're going to make meaningful change, it has to benefit all of us, not just some of us, and we have to do it together. Let's get started. Good, we are at time. Thank you. The majority of you stayed to listen to this, so I'm very grateful for that. I had a fear that there would just be my mother left. So you're all here. I'm happy to stick around for a couple more minutes if you want to put questions into the chat again about me, Ladies Get Paid, the book, career questions, all of that good stuff. I will be here again just for a few more minutes. I also really encourage you all, if you want to stay in touch, follow me on Instagram. My email is a little bit scary, so message me on Instagram. I get back to everybody, and it's Claire Gets Paid. And the other thing I want to do is really just thank Comcast, NBC Universal. They are the reason that I am able to stay in business and do this book tour. They have been a fabulous partner of ours. And of course, Politics and Prose, because we also wouldn't be able to do this without them. Last thing I wanted to mention before I let you all go is that our next book event is actually this Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, and it is with Sally Krawcheck, who is a Wall Street veteran, and she's also the co-founder and CEO of Ellevest, which is a wealth management investment firm targeting or specific to women, sort of taking into account things that women go through, and there's some career coaching that she does as well. And the last thing I guess I would say is if you haven't yet joined Ladies Get Paid, it's free. So, no excuse there. ladiesgetpaid.com. I mentioned that Slack group where we've got thousands of women exchanging millions of messages. I mean, there's a great jobs channel if anybody's looking for work. ladiesgetpaid.com. You sign up there. That's the event. I put it in chat. That's happening on Thursday. There's also there's an event tonight about learning to angel invest with Ladies Get Paid. Again, ladiesgetpaid.com, you'll see a calendar. It looks like there's maybe no questions here, which is maybe you've gotten everything answered. So that makes me feel good. And like I mentioned, purchasing the book from Politics and Prose, we prefer that to Amazon because that's an independent bookstore and we want to support them. Not a question, but I want to get the UK version of your book. Yes, the UK version of my book has an entirely different cover, which is really interesting. So if you want to Google Ladies Get Paid Book UK, I think you'll be able to find it. And the last thing I want to say in the last minute is happy day before the inauguration. Yay! That is, I'm just going to make an assumption about how people feel, but I'm feeling pretty great about it. Thank you all so very much. This recording will go up on YouTube. We will send you an email later today or tomorrow. Thanks again for giving us your time. Time is money. And I guess we all better have to go back to work. Okay, now go get paid, guys. Bye.